Mr. Ambassador, first of all, the military operation is still going on. The Israeli government is still saying they want to destroy, to eliminate Hamas. In your view, is that possible, eliminating Hamas completely?
No, it is not possible to eliminate Hamas completely. It is possible to destroy Hamas's military infrastructure, which is huge. When you look at the character of what has been built underground in Gaza, if all that material that was applied underground, from cement to steel to piping to electrical wiring, 300 miles of that underground, if that had all been put above ground, Gaza today would look more like Singapore than it does today. So you can't eliminate all of Hamas, but the military infrastructure, the military industrial base, that can be eliminated. The command control, the leadership, that can be eliminated. You will not eliminate every member of Hamas. You will not annihilate the group. You will not get rid of the idea. But you can show there's a Gaza that has a future, which Hamas cannot provide it. We've already seen it was impoverished before this. Now it needs an enormous amount of reconstruction. That'll never happen so long as Hamas remains in control, because they will be determined to rearm, and no one will invest as long as that's the case.
So when talking about the future, we are hearing voices also from the Israeli government saying that Palestinians have to be expelled, that they have to be relocated. Is that realistic in your eyes?
It's not only not realistic, it will not happen. There is no circumstance in which that will happen. So the idea that you're going to depopulate Gaza, that's being presented only by the most extreme elements within Israel. That's not going to be what the policy will be. Certainly that's not something the U.S. would tolerate. And the U.S. is clearly very important to Israel now. And more importantly, I think that President Biden has created a very strong bond with the Israeli public. And if he stakes out a position against something like that, the Israeli public will be strong in support of that and not of the extreme elements who are pushing it here.
When you're talking about the U.S. government, is it acceptable for the U.S. government, for President Biden, that Israeli forces would stay in Gaza? This is what Prime Minister Netanyahu is still saying, that they want to keep security control over Gaza.
I think it's fine to talk about security control in the near term, because that's just the reality. Israel will not stay in Gaza, because if it stays in Gaza, it will help ensure a successor to Hamas emerges that is just as radical. So it will not stay in Gaza. There is a difference between being in a position where if those who are in Gaza don't address security needs, that Israelis will go back in. That's not the same as saying that Israel will be in Gaza. It's also not the same as saying that Israel will be responsible for security in Gaza. If Israel is responsible for security in Gaza, it means it's staying in Gaza. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about security control, but I think what he means is, in the near term, that's a reality. Over time, that will not be the case.
So what might be the plan for the day after? We have the military operations, but the next step might be more important. Do you see a detailed plan for the day after?
I do think it's beginning to emerge here. It hadn't before. I think the instinct first was, in Israel, let's deal with this threat. Let's make sure Hamas can never again be a threat to Israelis. And then we'll worry about the day after once we've arrived at that point. But removing Hamas, when it's built 300 miles of tunnels, when it's built an enormous military machine, this is not a militia. This is a military with 5 brigades, 24 battalions, a military industrial base. It takes much longer to sort of root it out in terms of the threat it represents. And I think now, as Israelis, as we're 3 months into this, the Israelis are now beginning to look to, okay, what's the next phase? Already they've begun to remove forces from Gaza. They realize they don't need forces at large. They realize you need to reduce the reservists, because this is typically a small standing army. So you're beginning to see a change in terms of what the military campaign will be. You're beginning to see a reduction in the size of the Israeli forces that are there. That is kind of a precursor to what we'll be looking at, okay, what's the next phase? How does Israel begin to build within Gaza, maybe from north to south, some islands of success where, okay, they have succeeded in subduing Hamas, it's not in control, They allow people from the south to begin to return to the north. You create humanitarian assistance for them, shelter for them so they can do that, and you begin to work with probably a local Palestinian, I would say, group, not at a political level, but at a bureaucratic level. The people who can manage electricity, water, distribution of food, manage what is the beginning of providing shelter. All that's going to happen on the ground, and it needs to be with Palestinians. It makes it much more likely you can succeed that way. I think that's the next phase we'll see. At some point, you'll move beyond that, and you'll have some kind of an interim administration. The key is leaving Hamas in a position where it's too weak to prevent an alternative regime in Gaza.
So which other players, Mr. Ambassador, must be involved? Of course, we've got Israel, we've got the Palestinians, we've got the United States. Who else, which regional powers might have to be in the game?
It's inconceivable that Egypt will not be part of what comes next because it borders it. So that's a fact. And Rafah is the crossing point. So Egypt will be involved in some fashion. I believe that we will see the Gulf states involved in some fashion, especially not to provide reconstruction yet, because their view is they'll do reconstruction, but only when there's a political horizon, a political endpoint, meaning two states. And that's the body politic here in Israel is still experiencing the shock and the trauma. They have to work that through. This is an issue that they're not ready to confront yet. There'll be a political reckoning here, and there'll be a debate over what the relationship between Israel and Palestinians should be. A debate, by the way, has never taken place. Oslo was done in secret and then presented. There was opposition, but truly not a debate. When Sharon withdrew 100% from Gaza, he made the decision. There was opposition, but there was no debate. Okay, what should our relationship with the Palestinians be? That's coming. In the meantime, until you get to that point, you need to begin a process within Gaza of rehabilitating it, of addressing the humanitarian needs. I believe that the Gulf states are prepared to do that. They won't go beyond to reconstruction, but they can provide, for example, shelter for people. They can provide the trailers, caravans for people who are moving back. That's obviously a humanitarian need. That, I think, you'll see. Egypt, the Gulf states, maybe some of the Europeans, the United States, I think they will all play a role in this intermediate phase before you get to what could then be what I call an alternative interim administration. And with some time and some ingenuity, we can then recreate an approach that focuses on how do we create coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. Neither one of them is going anyplace, so producing coexistence is essential right now, both. There's a trauma here. There's also a trauma among Palestinians. I mean, what has been suffered in Gaza is such that their ability to think about coexistence with the Israelis right now is really hard. But the Israeli ability to think about a Palestinian state is also really hard. So we need to create a process that allows both sides to get beyond where they are before we can get back to talking politically about what's the basis of coexistence.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.